Welcome to Road to Recovery.
Hello and welcome to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. Sagi is founder of Shaked Law Personal Injury Lawyers and is ranked as one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States by the American Trial Lawyers Association. With a wealth of experience in personal injury, wrongful death, and complex litigation cases, he passionately advocates for victims and has recovered multi-million-dollar settlements in damages for his clients. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're going to talk about the 5 most important federal motor carrier safety regulations for trucking companies that everyone really needs to know. Sagi, welcome back.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, so can you briefly introduce yourself and explain your experience and expertise in transportation law and trucking regulations?
Yeah, definitely. So Kevin told you my name. It's Sagi Shaked. I'm a lawyer. I've been a lawyer for almost 25 years now. And a lot of what we do and have concentrated on in our firm has been trucking collisions or trucking accidents. And I've had the pleasure of speaking across the country on trucking regulations to other trial lawyer organizations, and traumatic brain injuries I've spoken about. So a lot of what we do, it just seemed to morph into this over the years, has been trucking collisions dealing with, serious injuries, catastrophic injuries, wrongful death cases. And I guess it all stems back from years earlier. I would be trying every type of case out there, whether it was a car accident case, a trucking case, fall case. And eventually you get known for trying cases, and then people start sending you all types of cases and you start getting more selective. And luckily we've been fortunate enough to be selective to the point where the majority of the cases that we're handling are trucking accident cases, and we get to help families who've been devastated by trucking companies and what happens when they put drivers who are unqualified or, drivers who are not following the safety regulations, or companies that are not following the safety regulations. So that's kind of a little bit about me. I am a double board certified civil trial lawyer. I try a lot of cases, and we represent clients only who have been in bad accidents, who have suffered bad injuries or horrible injuries, and we try to help them get fair compensation for what they went through and for the rest of their life. So we're looking at not just today, but we're looking at the future as well.
What are some of the most critical safety regulations that are violated, which lead to serious accidents with injury or even death?
Let's go through a couple of them. So I do this talk across the country on the 10 most important safety regulations that are violated across the board by trucking companies and their drivers. For purposes of this podcast, we'll probably break that down into a couple of different podcasts because some of them can be long, but you'll talk about one is the driver qualification file. So there's a regulation that deals just with a driver qualification file. There's a regulation that deals with maintenance on what they have to do in terms of maintaining the truck and vehicle inspection. There's a regulation on drivers and the definitions, meaning a lot of trucking companies try to use the independent contractor. This is an independent contractor. We're not on the hook. It's not us. It's this driver. So those are 3 of the big ones. And then there's a lot of subsets in there. There's hours of service. You can't drive over a certain amount of hours. We'll talk about that probably in the next one because that is a whole 20-minute ordeal just to talk about that and how the different violations occur. So those are the major ones that we're going to talk about today. So those are the ones that we should be looking at.
Can you walk us through the process of compliance with the periodic inspection requirements?
Sure. So every 150 miles or so, a trucking company driver should be inspecting their truck. And what do I mean by that? They need to go around the truck, inspect their tires, inspect the engine, just look at the engine, make sure everything's okay, make sure there's nothing leaking, make sure the tires are tight so tires don't fly off. That's happened too. Make sure the door to the trailer is closed and locked. They got to make sure that their warning signs on the truck, the flappers, the warning signs you see it on a lot of trucks, the red tape with the white, to make sure you're visible at nighttime, just in case your lights are not on. So there's a whole process and there's a checklist that they should be following. Sometimes the checklist is electronic. and you can get it into the electronic program, and then we'll request it in litigation. And then sometimes it's by paper. When I first started off practicing about 25 years ago, it was on paper and we would ask for it. And I can tell you 9 out of 10 times it was never done. This is a law that seems like nobody seems to follow. They just don't follow it. And then when you have a horrific crash, they try to say, oh, it's not a big deal. It is a big deal. That's one law that you're not following, along with all the other laws you're not following. And there's a pattern here. These laws are under the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, were meant, the sole purpose of having that organization was meant to keep the motoring public safe. So when you ask about vehicle inspections or maintenance that they do before a truck gets on the road, those are important things to keep you and I and everyone on the roadway safe. That's the purpose of them. So that's why that regulation is extremely important. If they do it right, you won't have tires flying off. You won't have, worn out warning stickers on the vehicle. You won't have truck drivers that their mirrors don't work and can't see from their blind spots. You won't have that because they've done their checks. You won't have items falling off a truck, right? If they do this information, if they do what they're supposed to do, which is follow that checklist, not just check stuff off, but make sure you're actually checking. That's what a safe and reasonable driver does. That's what a safe and reasonable company do. That's what they do if they're following the law.
What happens if a truck fails an inspection?
So if they fail the inspection, they shouldn't get on the road, right? Because again, you're endangering everyone on the road. So a lot of times they don't pass the inspection, and good trucking companies will make sure their trucks don't go on the road until it's fixed and properly taken care of. Now, that causes a dilemma. Why? Truck drivers need to get to point A, from point A to point B at a certain time. Otherwise, they get deducted or they won't make money. So they can't be sitting in the shop the whole time. So it kind of causes a dilemma for the truck driver and the trucking company. They don't get paid when their trucks are not moving. So they've got to be very efficient about ensuring that their trucks are safe when they get on the roadway. And so again, the dilemma there is, do we put them on the roadway when it's not 100% safe? A lot of trucking companies do that. And then you have collisions and you have people who are driving unsafe trucks. And sometimes it's not the driver's fault. It's the fact that the company didn't want to do the safety measures and they put everyone at risk. And I don't understand why, because doing the safety measure, yeah, you lose a little bit of money, but the amount of money you lose if you cause a collision or cause a wrongful death is 1,000-fold compared to what you lose, or even 1,000,000-fold. So why do it? But they still do it. Nothing's going to change. It's been the same way from day one. Companies decide to take shortcuts, and the shortcuts cost people their lives.
Yeah. So what are some of the common issues that trucking companies face regarding driver qualifications and licensing compliance?
Yeah, so the driver qualification file is unique to trucking companies, right? It's a specific regulation, 395. It's in the 395 Code of Federal Regulations. And it specifically talks about what needs to be contained in that driver qualification file. So for example, one of the items that needs to be contained is a medical certificate. Each driver every year needs to be examined by a physician or someone qualified like a physician, maybe a nurse practitioner, but there needs to be a physician that signs off on it, saying that the driver has passed the basic minimum requirements to drive. They've checked their vision. They've checked their hearing. They don't have any major neck or back problems or extremity problems, and that they're perfectly capable of driving. So if that's not in the file and then someone has an event, the trucking company is going to be at fault. They really shouldn't be putting that person back on the road. And if they're using a rubber stamp kind of facility, because a lot of these facilities just open their, they rent 250 square feet, little office, and the person comes in and it's just sort of like a rubber stamp, boom, we'll give you this medical clearance so you can drive. If they're using those type of facilities, then the trucking company needs to be careful, because if everyone's passing, that's a problem. How stringent are they checking these employees for medical conditions, especially something like a sleep apnea? Are they doing any checks for that? You have fatigue drivers. Are you letting fatigue drivers back on the road? So that's one portion of the qualification file. Another portion, obviously, they have to have their license. Now, it's important to note that the law says you can't have more than one CDL, commercial driver's license. Some people have two from different states. You can't do that. You have to have one. So that's important. And then another important item within that driver qualification file, and we talked about this on one of the other podcasts, is do they have the driver's prior employment file from the other trucking companies that they used to work for, right? Doesn't that call to question, why are they coming to your trucking company? Something must have happened, unless you just pay a lot more money. Mm-hmm. And then unless it's that reason. Now, if it's a different reason, you want to find out what that reason is. Maybe that driver was a poor driver and they got rid of him, the prior company. And here you have this new company hiring him, but they're ignoring what the prior file says. And then they put this dangerous driver on the road driving 80,000 pounds. And sure enough, someone gets hurt. So that's an important part of the driver qualification file. So we look at everything. Where did you find your driver? How did you find your driver? What background did you do? Because then you can have a claim for negligent hiring. And then if you know someone is a bad driver, did you get them back and test them and then make sure they qualify through everything and then go through all the policies and procedures and actually teach them? We had a case where they had policies and procedures in place and they were great. These policies and procedures were great if they were followed. Turns out the driver said he went to the meetings, but those meetings, they were like, again, rubber stamp. Here you go. Just sign that you were at the meeting. And we were able to, in that case, take the deposition of the former operations manager who said, yeah, we had these meetings, but it was a bunch of BS. They never really went through the whole meeting. They never really educated them on the specific policies. So they had policies, but they weren't following them. Mm-hmm. So there's all different ways that trucking companies try to skim around following the law and making sure that their drivers comply. So, and again, fatigue is a huge component. So if you have someone who's fatigued, you can identify that from other files. So it's important that you get that driver qualification file. And remember, they can, under the current law now, it may change. These companies only have to keep their driver qualification files for 3 years. So they're good about destroying them because they know it's not going to be good for them.
Right.
So yep. That's another important law or regulation that they fail to follow. So we talked about the driver qualification files. We talked about the vehicle inspections. Another one is the federal law versus the state law. And so federal law requires the driver qualification files, and federal law, if it's a difference between federal law and state law, the federal law preempts. So federal law, those Code of Federal Regulations will apply before the state law applies because the Code of Federal Regulations takes precedence. So that's another key regulation when we talk about that.
When it comes to insurance, what are the federal insurance requirements for motor carriers, and why is it important to understand those regulations?
Yeah, so the insurance requirements, a lot of times you'll see in trucking accidents, especially when it's interstate, again, between different states, trucking companies will say, oh, we only have minimal coverage or we don't have any coverage. It doesn't work that way because the federal law mandates that they have a minimum of $750. So if you are representing yourself, or if you're an attorney that hasn't dealt with one of these cases or hasn't had this issue come up, the federal law requires that there be $750,000 in insurance. If an insurance company sold a trucking company that does interstate travel insurance less than $750,000, then now you have an action against the insurance company for not providing coverage pursuant to federal law. You cannot, as an insurance company, circumvent federal law, sell insurance, say, hey, we're not going to comply with the federal law because the trucking company doesn't want to comply with the federal law. It doesn't work that way. So there's different riders on the policy that are required that if there is no insurance coverage for some reason or another, the insurance company will step in on that rider and they will have to pay $750,000, of course, $750,000 if you can prove the case. So that's another important distinction. Now, I'm giving you, in this one, we've talked about the insurance, we've talked about driver qualifications, we've talked about federal law taking precedence or preempting state law, and we've talked about the vehicle inspections. Those are 4 things. There are, over 100 plus items under those Code of Federal Regulations that do apply in these cases. And it's a walking trap for someone who doesn't handle trucking cases, because you will get used and abused by the defense lawyers who do these types of cases for a living. They know those regs. They try to be bullies and push people around and say you don't know what you're doing when you're younger or when you don't handle these types of cases. So be careful on who you choose as your lawyer. And if you're a lawyer handling these cases, get someone involved who knows those regulations down cold to help you out and help your client.
That's a good segue. Are there any major regulatory changes on the horizon for the trucking industry that you feel that people should be aware of?
So yeah, the trucking companies always have a huge lobby group because they gather together and they're trying to minimize the laws and minimize the regulators, because for them, they have to stop at weigh stations to make sure they don't weigh too much or it's proper weight. They get stopped. They have to provide their hours of service. Did they violate their hours of service? So they're trying to make that more lax. And then on the other side, you have lawyers like me and organizations that I'm involved in that try to push the issue of trucking safety. So right now on the horizon, there's nothing specific, but we're always trying to push and make it safer for everyone on the motoring public, to make it safer for them by ensuring that if trucking companies comply with these laws, which are meant to protect people, these truck accidents don't occur. You won't have thousands of people dying every single year because trucking companies don't comply with the laws. Make the laws harsher. So if a company is not complying, they get shut down. So you don't have a tragic event like some of the cases we have in our office happen.
Yeah, that's a good point. You see a lot of tragic events in your line of work.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, you're dealing with families that have been devastated or people that have lost limbs. I think we spoke about, we have an individual who lost both of his legs above the knees from a crash. It's sad and it's hard because you want to help these people. At the same time, they should get swift justice, but you have insurance companies and you have defendants taking really difficult positions that force these cases to go on for years instead of getting swift, fast justice and getting these cases closed. And if they did that, you wouldn't need lawyers. But of course, they don't do that. They're protecting their money and not trying to help you.
Absolutely. Tough spot, but glad you're doing what you're doing. Well, thanks for tuning in to Road to Recovery, Advocacy and Insights for Trucking Accidents with Sagi Shaked. For more information or to connect with Sagi, you can check out shakedlaw.com. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and leave us a review if you get a moment. Thanks so much, Sagi. Always great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.